Welcome to Examining Evolution. Today we're going to talk about the evolutionary explanation for how single-celled organisms became multi-celled organisms. And we're just going to be looking at one article today. So this was, I simply asked someone, hey, can you show me the, evidence that this transition actually happened, that a single cell, was able to transition and evolve into a multicellular organism? Where is the scientific evidence for that transition? And that person supplied me with this article that we're going to go over today. And so I want to say hello to Saved by Grace. Hi, Doki. Doki's the most faithful supporter of channels like mine. So thank you so much. And so the article that we're going to discuss is about a experiment that was done with algae to see if algae would respond to a predator and if they would become multicellular. But there's, something a little bit strange about this research. It's the attempt is to show if algae respond to the predator but the reason that algae was chosen for this experiment is because we already know that algae often group themselves together and that we already know that they can do what's about to be shown in this experiment. So it's not really an example of evolution, but you'll see that the language throughout the article really makes it sound like we're watching these algae evolve. The word evolve is used over and over again. And so, hi, Greenie. Hi, Redefined Living. Thank you for being here. So, and in the popular media, you'll see things like this where you've got, let me go back, where you've got, alga takes first evolutionary leap to multicellularity. So it isn't just the scientific article that we're going to discuss that kind of overplays this, experiment and the results of it. But it's also just in popular media, the idea that, algae are proof of this transition from a single cell to being multicellular. So the article that we're actually going to discuss comes from the journal Nature, and it's called De Novo Origins of Multicellularity in Response to Predation. So we'll get started and we're going to go through this article together. Hi, Danny. Glad you could make it. Hi, Otangelo. And when I finish going through this article and talking about it, I am going to invite others on to the stream to discuss it. So if you want to jump on the stream, be ready to do that. So let's just start at the beginning of this article. It says, the transition from unicellular to multicellular life was one of the few major events in the history of life that created new opportunities for more complex biological systems to evolve. Wow, that's an understatement. One of the few major events. Do you realize how many major events would have to happen for all of the variety of life that we see, the variety of organisms that we see? We need more than a few major events to happen, okay? Predation is hypothesized as one selective pressure that may have driven the evolution of multicellularity. Here we show that de novo origins of simple multicellularity can evolve in response to predation. We subjected outcrossed populations of the unicellular green alga, Chlamydomonas reinhardtii, to selection by filter feeding predator Paramecium tetrarella. 2 of the 5 experimental populations evolved multicellular structures not observed in unselected control population. Now, wait a minute. listen to the strong language that's being used here. 2 of the 5 experimental populations evolved multicellular structures. Does that sound? The whole article is like de novo origins of multicellularity, something new in multicellularity. And this makes it sound like we're about to watch algae evolve. But is that really what's going to happen in this experiment? Let's look. Considerable variation exists in the evolved multicellular life cycles, with both cell number and propagule size varying among isolates. Several assays show that evolved multicellular traits provide effective protection against predation. These results support the hypothesis that selection imposed by predators may have played a role in some origins of multicellularity. Now, when we're talking about discussing how evolution actually happened, how did this whole process happen? And I'm often hearing this gigantic claim that evolution is a scientific fact. We just have so much observable evidence. We have so much evidence for it that we can't even give you any evidence because there's just so many papers on this and you'd never understand it. Well, then how about if one of those papers actually gives me evidence instead of telling me a story? And what this is saying is that imposed by predators may have played a role in some origins of multicellularity. In other words, we still don't know. Okay, so let's continue on. Nearly all macroscopic life is multicellular. As Leo Buss emphasized in The Evolution of Individuality, the very existence of integrated multicellular organisms is an outcome of the evolutionary processes, not a starting condition. It seems, in fact, to be a common outcome. Multicellular organisms have evolved from unicellular ancestors dozens of times. Now, is that a fact or is that a gigantic assumption? Now, he does quote some sources for this information here. So the sources he quotes are from Kaiser D, Building a Multicellular Organism, and The Evolution of Multicellularity, a minor major transition. So maybe we will look at those articles another day and see if they really do provide a good source for this gigantic claim here that, hey, multicellularity has evolved many times. Or do we really know that? Animals, land plants, fungi, red algae, brown algae, several groups of green algae, cellular and acrid slime molds, and colonial ciliates, among others, each descend from a different unicellular ancestor. Now, how do we know that? Probably because they're so different, they need a different ancestor, but that doesn't prove that they had a different ancestor. There is another explanation for how they came to be the way that they are. They could have been designed the way that they are. So, two retrospective approaches, comparative methods, and the fossil record have proven valuable in reconstructing how these transitions may have occurred. They don't know how these transitions occurred, how they may have occurred, right? And what's interesting here is they're talking about retrospective approaches looking back into history. So they're talking about, something that we cannot observe and experiment with today in a prospective study. But going on, we're going to find a very interesting admission here. Although both approaches have been critical to our understanding of early multicellular evolution, each has its limitations. For most multicellular groups, little or no fossil evidence exists that is relevant to the first steps in the transition from unicellular to multicellular life. There is no fossil evidence for this transition. comparative methods suffer from a lack of intermediate forms between the multicellular organisms we are interested in and their extant unicellular relatives. Furthermore, direct knowledge of unicellular ancestors is not available. Okay, so extant unicellular relatives often serve as stand-ins, but this is a poor approximation as they have been evolving independently as single-celled organisms since they diverged from their multicellular relatives. So basically, they're saying, hey, look, the organisms that went from unicellular to multicellular, we don't even know what they were like because we don't have any of them, because the unicellular organisms that we have now, well, those are much different because they've been evolving all this time. So we really don't know what those ancestors were like if they existed. So a third perspective approach designed to circumvent these limitations has emerged over the past decade. The experimental evolution of multicellularity in otherwise unicellular microbes enables real-time observation of morphological, developmental, and genetic changes that attend the transition to multicellular life. Boras and colleagues exposed cultures of the green alga Corella vulgaris to predation by the flagellate Acromonas valencia, resulting in the evolution of small, heritable, stable algal colonies. Now, this annoys me a lot because they're talking about evolution as if they watched the algae change into something different, like we watched the evolution happen before our eyes, right? And, if we pull up the definition of evolution, I mean, the dictionary definition of it, look it up. But it's, this idea of this gradual process of change over time and permanent change within organisms. But that is not at all what happens with the algae, okay? So let's see. Bex and colleagues showed that exposure to the predatory rotifer Brachionis calciphorus selected for heritable changes in the rate of formation of multicellular palmaloids in the green alga Chlamydomonas reinhardti. Radcliffe and colleagues have shown that selection for an increased rate of settling out of liquid suspension consistently results in the evolution of multicellular snowflake colonies. Again, they're using this word evolution as if they're watching the organism actually change. We have known for a long time that algae can group itself together and stay in that state. They have not discovered anything new in this study, except that they saw the algae react to the predator in the study that we're about to read about. Predation has long been hypothesized as an ecologically plausible selective pressure that could explain at least some origins of multicellularity, as most predators can only consume prey with a narrow range of sizes. Filter-feeding predators are common in aquatic ecosystems, and algae that are larger than a threshold size are largely immune to them. David Kirk proposed that this predation threshold could explain the evolution of multicellularity in the volvocine algae, which are close relatives of C. reinhardti. So basically what they're doing is this predator that they're introducing, right? It's they're introducing this paramecium, and because the alga by itself could be consumed by the paramecium, they're hoping that the algae will group together to resist, being devoured. And that's exactly what happens. They group together, but like I said, we already know that algae can do this. So it's not, they did, test whether they would specifically react to the predator, and they did. So in this study, we present experiments in which we use the ciliate predator Paramecium tetrarale to select the de novo evolution of multicellularity in outcrossed populations of C. reinhardtii. We describe the heritable multicellular life cycles that evolved and compare them to the ancestral unicellular life cycle. In addition, we show that the evolved multicellular life cycles are stable over thousands of asexual generations in the absence of predators. Comparative assays show that the evolved multicellular phenotypes provide a fitness advantage over the unicellular algae in the presence of predators. Because C. reinhardtii has no multicellular ancestors, these experiments represent a completely novel origin of obligate multicellularity. Well, let's keep going and see what's going on. Oh, Spim is here. All right, exciting. So what happened? After 50 weekly transfers, simple multicellular structures evolved in 2 of 5 predator-selected populations. The strains have maintained their evolved characteristics of simple multicellularity in the absence of predators for 4 years unfrozen in use laboratory strains. Therefore, we are confident that the phenotype traits that we report are below are stably heritable. So what they're saying is, hey, two of these groups of the 5 that were subjected to the predator, 2 of them actually changed. They grouped together, and there's a couple different ways they grouped together, and I'm not going to read the entire explanation of the ways they grouped together because it's going to be kind of confusing. They talk about like B2, B5, B, and it just kind of goes, but there were 2 different ways that they grouped together. One of them was like they gathered together in, kind of aggregated together. And then it formed like this, basically a slime around them to kind of like hold them together. Let's see if I can find the word they use for that, external membrane. And let me see if I can show this picture. And then, so in one of those groups, it was actually the group all had the same gene. So it was basically not the group that came together, but instead it was dividing within itself, and it still formed that membrane around it. But again, this is not something new that algae developed the ability to do in response to this predator. Algae have always been able to do this. That is why they were selected for this experiment, because the experimenters recognized that, hey, they might actually be able to get a response to the predator, and the algae may be able to solve the problem and show that, grouping together could help them with against the predator. So there's no actual biological change happening within the algae itself. So they did continue to live on in that multicellular state, though. So for 4 years, they didn't break up and live as single alga. They continued to live on in this multicellular state. So, all right, let's keep going. I'm gonna go now to where it's the discussion of their results. So I'm kind of skipping this whole article is available on a link right there in the description of this video. So if you want to read the details of their results, please do that. What I'm going to read is their discussion of the results. So our results show that the transition to a simple multicellular life cycle can happen rapidly in response to an ecologically relevant selective pressure. By increasing in size beyond the predation threshold of a filter-feeding predator, multicellular C. reinhardtii that evolved from an ancestrally unicellular lineage are protected from predation for at least part of their life cycle. Under selection for increased size, formation of multicellular structures may be an easier route than increasing cell size because trade-offs imposed by scaling relationships, chiefly the reduction in surface area to volume ratio, because more mutational paths are available and or because available mutations have fewer or less severe pleiotropic effects. Okay, so in other words, this is saying it seems like this grouping together of cells may have been more effective against predation than if like a cell increased in size or, mutated in some other way. Observations in other species suggest that the relative ease of transitioning from a unicellular to a multicellular life cycle is at least somewhat general. Okay, similar transitions reportedly occurred within 100 generations in the green alga Chlorella vulgaris and within 300 generations in the yeast Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Although there have surely been many microbial evolution experiments in which multicellularity did not evolve, I love how they just keep using this word evolve. Now, if you're using the word evolve as a simple change, if you're just using it in place of the word change, fine. But for most of us, we understand that the word evolve means something a little more than that. We associate it with the theory of evolution, right? So, in fact, I'm going to just read out the definition because I think it makes it incredibly confusing for people who read this. So you could read this and totally think that like this experiment actually showed evolution. It did not. So here's the definition of evolve just from the first dictionary definition I pulled up. Okay, it's so definitions from Oxford. Okay, develop gradually, especially from a simple to a more complex form. Okay, so has this developed gradually from a simple to a more complex form? Absolutely not. It had the same abilities that it always had. It did not evolve in that sense. So let's continue. Where am I? Okay. So the multicellular forms that evolved in our experiments bear some resemblance. Did I already read this? To palmilloids, transient multicellular structures that appear under some conditions in C. reinhardtii related algae. The propensity to form palmilloids varies among species and strains. In wild type C. reinhardtii, it is a phenotypically plastic response to the presence of certain organic acids. So they are saying specifically, what I'm telling you about this, not introducing any new information, not evolving. They are saying right here in this statement, in this type of algae that they used, they already know that the presence of certain organic acids, it triggers this plastic response, a phenotypical plastic response. And that means that it causes that organism to show an ability that is sometimes hidden if it's not in that type of environment. It does not mean that something new developed in the organism. So, okay, let's see. Predators have also been observed to induce the information of multicellular structures in the green algae Chlorella and Synzendesmus, as well as in bacteria. The term palmilloid encompasses two distinct phenomena: a failure of daughter cells to escape the mother cell wall, resulting in colonies of 4 to 16 cells and the production of a gelatinous material that is secreted extracellularly, resulting in the adhesion among cells and colonies. So, like I was saying earlier, they're just discussing how we already know algae, they can do this stuff. They can produce this gelatinous stuff that holds them together, right? And that happens already in certain conditions. So that wasn't even in question of whether they could do that or not. There was no evolution here. It was, this article was, and this experiment was simply to show, would they react to a predator? And that was supposed to be their evidence for how multicellular life could have possibly formed. Again, not an example of evidence for evolution. An experiment to try to show that a hypothetical scenario may have been possible. So this is not evidence for evolution. All right, so the ability of wild-type C. reinhardtii to form palmilloids suggests that the founding population in our experiment already possessed a toolkit for producing multicellular structures. So if it wasn't clear already, there it is very clear. The experimenters know the algae already possessed this ability. Okay, our life cycle observations carried out as in near as possible identical conditions constitute a common garden experiment, demonstrating that the evolved phenotypes have a genetic basis. It may be, though, that this basis involves the co-option of a previously existing plastic response. If so, the shift from a primarily unicellular to, so they're admitting that basically, like, if it wasn't in those conditions, it may have, the response to it was based on this condition that they provided. But it was already built in. That was really an unclear way of saying it. Anyway, they're just saying the same stuff over again. If so, a shift from a primarily unicellular but facultatively multicellular to an obligately multicellular life cycle may have required only a change from facultative to obligate expression of the genes involved in palmilloid formation. So it may have, again, with the maze, this tells you we aren't finding anything definitive. Our results support the view that predation may have played a role in at least some origins of multicellularity. So is this really evidence that of how we went from unicellular to multicellular? No, it's simply an idea about what might have played a role. So this cannot be used as evidence to support that evolution is true. Now, there may be out there some article that actually does demonstrate how unicellular life went to multicellular life, but if there was, I doubt we would be having so many mays in this article. But I am open if anybody has that definitive proof, those observations, that scientific experiment that can show how a single-celled organism can evolve into, how multicellularity ever evolved. If anyone has that, please send it to me. We'll look at that. If there's a better article out there, I'm happy to read it. So, continuing on. Okay, I think that's all really that we need to actually say about this. After this, they kind of go in more to their methods, but that's really just a greater description of the experiment itself. So, guys, if anybody thank you all of those of you who are here, and I'm going to put the link in the chat. If anybody wants to jump in and say anything on this topic, please come on in. Good to see you. Pigs can fly. Spim, glad you're here. Greenie, yay! All right. So I'm waiting. Oh, when's the announcement? Oh, I guess Greenie's asking about the maybe the Atheist of the Month announcement, which I'm actually doing a stream on my other channel, Bread of Life, in just a little while. And Sal Cordova will be coming on to talk about a really fun topic. And I will also be announcing the Atheist of the Month. And so I hope you guys can make it to that stream. I believe it starts in 2 hours from now. So looking forward to that. Let's see what I'll put some of your comments up here while I'm waiting for Otangelo to join. A laugh in place of a scientific response. This is a payment for the next free education on evolution for you, Spim. Okay. Hi, Otangelo. How are you?
Yes. Hello, Rebecca. I'm fine, thanks. And you?
Good. What are your thoughts about the article?
Well, it's obviously evolutionary storytelling, which we are accustomed to. So they make up a bunch of just so stories, and they suppose that we just believe them because they are the experts.
Right. Yes. So, was there anything in that article, anything that I read that would lead you to believe that, we have some evidence for moving from a one-celled organism and like a transition in evolution into a multicellular organism?
Well, there is one factor which is absolutely essential in order to drive from unicellularity to multicellularity. And these are two features which have to merge in that interaction between two cells, which are absolutely essential. One is cell-cell communication, and that demands that these channels are actually created. And secondly, that two cells can adhere or annex together, that they can join together. Okay, and if you don't have either one or the other, then two cells, they will not work together. So you need to develop that simultaneously. And if you just develop cell-cell communication, but these two cells, they cannot join together, then no deal. And vice versa as well. If you have the molecules, the proteins, which there are several kinds of them, if they join together, but these two cells cannot communicate together, then no deal either. So in my understanding, just this simple fact is already an evolution killer, because how would these two mechanisms evolve at the same time and simultaneously together? And this is already a big problem, because these signaling molecules, they require languages. There are cells which communicate in various forms. There are various different signaling pathways and languages. And these languages also have to emerge somehow or evolve somehow. How do you do that in a gradative step? These are very big problems which are rarely actually considered in the evolutionary literature.
Yes, exactly, Otangelo. We get these stories about how one thing could have possibly changed or mutated, but with that, we were not considering all the many processes that have to be working together in unison, like you said, and they need each other. There's no way that these things, at least there's no scientific observations for how these processes could have come about just one step at a time of different parts.
Yes, and I studied these signaling pathways, and I have never seen a science paper explaining the language itself of this signaling. I am not sure, but I think science isn't yet there um, to explain the language. Okay, and it is very complex and it is difficult to unravel all these secrets of cellular communication. But I think once that science is getting there, we will all be flabbergasted by the beauty and the complexity and the ingenuity, and just it will just point more and more towards the necessity of a creator which did set up all these marvelous things.
Hmm. Yes. Can you recap, Otangelo, just really quickly, the what you mentioned before about the processes that would have to be, like, how, what the things that we would have to explain in order to go from unicellular to multicellular?
Yes, there are basically two essential things.
Hmm.
One is cell signaling, and
Hmm.
with signaling, I mean um, the fact that cells they communicate together. In the
Hmm.
same sense as we are not now talking together, cells as well they talk to each other, and we could call that cellese, the language cellese, or um, it is a language which they use, which science hasn't yet fully unraveled the meaning of that language. We just know that there is an information exchange going on all the time, where cells um, they know, for example, the environmental situation can adapt to that. They can communicate to each other and say, hey, it is too hot. Let's produce more proteins which adapt to the hot weather. Or um, there is not sufficient nutrition here. We need more, let's say, iron, for example, which is an important um, atom which is required for the various proteins. So they will maybe make less proteins which use iron, sulfur, cofactors, and so forth. So in order to adapt to the environment, the cells they need always to communicate with the environment. They need to get that information from the environment and then respond to it. And in order to respond to it, when it is a multicellular organism, then they exchange between them information. So that information exchange must be set up.
Hmm.
But if you don't have also proteins which stick one cell together to the other, then they will be just not they will not be together. They cannot stick together. And in order to form a tissue, cells need to have cell adhesions. And these are protein specific proteins. There are 3 or 4 different categories um, which provide that the cells stick together. And the communication the channels they are also embedded in these proteins which permit that cells stick together, and there are channels which go through from one cell to the other, and where that communication back and forth can happen. So
Hmm.
all this has to merge at once, and we are talking here about very very complex proteins and communication systems, and saying that step by step by changing accidentally the gene somehow this evolved. This is evolutionary storytelling.
Mm. Yes.
And
Okay. Well, exactly.
and
Wait, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. Yeah, and I mean, I was just talking now about if we, let's suppose, go from one cell to another. But when it goes, for example, to explain the origin of completely new function, or a body member like an arm or an eye or hearing or whatever, then we are talking about several different features which have to merge together, like the nervous system, like blood cells, like the veins, and so forth, and the bones, and so forth. There are 5, 6 things which have to merge suddenly together, and claiming that this can happen by step, slowly, this is just not what we expect that would be possible in order to have several features at once evolving into the right direction.
Right. And, the solution that's often given for these types of changes is, well, if you have enough time, you see, these things don't happen quickly, they happen over millions of years. And I don't really see how time is on your side when you're talking about the development of life. You really don't have time for certain developments to take place, right? Whatever that organism is, it has to begin with the ability to reproduce. If it doesn't have the ability to reproduce, it doesn't have a million years or millions of years to develop that ability. It has to begin life with that ability or get it within its lifetime. And so for each one of these proposed changes, there still has to be an organism that is capable of reproducing itself in whatever manner. And when you just consider all the forms of life and all the different ways they reproduce, these are not the kind of things that can just happen instantly, and like you said, then they've got to have even these the ability for these different organs that you mentioned to come together. So just even if we got from unicellular to multicellular, that still really doesn't help get any farther. But even the unicellular to multicellular, I don't see a plausible scenario for that to happen.
Yes, so let's just say, for example, you want to grow a new member. I can list here 7 different things which have to merge and evolve together. That is the muscular system, the skeletal system, the nervous system, the endocrine system, the circulatory system, the integumentary system, and the lymphatic system. I can maybe give a link. You can put it in the side chat, and people can eventually then look it up
Yeah,
and
great.
study these things and get a better understanding about what I'm talking about. But you say it's something very important, and we hear that all the time. Oh, just give it enough time, and then the miracle will happen, and organisms will complexify and become multicellular and become us and this and that. And um, the problem is that if we talk about this in regards of the origin of life, what we know is that molecules, rather than complexify, they devolve into asphalts. So they decompose.
Mm,
And there are science papers which state that very clearly. And I mention that all the time. What we see, if you leave just amino acids or nucleotides. Nucleotides, for example, ribose, which is the backbone, disintegrates in 40 days. And let's suppose you would have these molecules on a prebiotic earth without oxygen, then UV light would immediately destroy these molecules. Okay, so time isn't a friend for naturalists; it is an enemy, actually.
right. Yes. There was something Danny put in the chat. I don't know, was he trying to help me pronounce something? Look, Sarah VCA. Is this what is this? Do you have any idea what that means?
Well,
Otangelo?
since I'm not a native English speaker, I maybe be worse than you are to pronounce it correctly. So
Okay. Well, I don't know what he wanted to explain to me. If anybody does,
service
then
service I maybe I don't know.
okay. Well, um,
The service
thanks for
I
coming
yeah.
on, Otangelo. Do you want to say anything else?
No,
Like,
no.
I'm getting ready to close it up, I guess, because it's
Okay.
just us,
Okay.
and we've kind of set up what we wanted to say about this. So,
Okay. You can close the stream.
okay, do you have any final words?
No, thank you for having me on the stream and for doing this. It is really enjoyable, and I think you are a great tool in the hands of the Lord. So praise God for what you're doing.
Thank you, Tangelo, and the same to you. I'm so
Yeah.
glad that you're really spending time studying and looking into this stuff, and you have so much more knowledge than me. So I'm really glad that you jumped on. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Doki, Spim, Pigs Can Fly, everybody who joined, Greenie, Janet, and I think I got everybody, Danny, and yeah, I appreciate you guys. And if you have any topics that you want me to do a stream on, any articles that you want me to read, bring your proof for evolution. I'm happy to examine it. That's what I'm here to do, and to separate what is actually science from storytelling. So thanks, guys, and God bless you.